One of those two assholes is going to be president regardless. How many people usually vote? 60 million? 120?
Yeah, 2016 was 139 million.
Okay,
it's about 60 million each side.
Each side, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. That ties directly into what we've been talking about here, like what this whole idea of like the necessity of looking at the political system in a different way. Because I think that when you're finally red-pilled on how the system works, you have two options for how you can choose to go about it. One is to disengage. And that's kind of like the self-preservation model. It's like a full defense model. You're like, you can go on the offense or you can stay on defense. And if you're going to stay on defense, then that's the passivism model, where you just become completely passive. You disengage from the system altogether. You check out, and you just focus, keep your head down, try not to disturb anybody, go along to get along, and do whatever is necessary to survive. And you just accommodate whatever the established power structure is. You just accommodate it, and you figure out how the game works, and then you just try to succeed within the game. That's one position. That's Jason's position, I think. I think that's where he's been defaulting toward. Yeah. The other position is, once you realize how the system works and you realize that this is a centuries-long conspiracy, essentially. It's like a non-organized, it's like an emergent conspiracy that is attacking at the very structure of civilization, and it's undermining the things that create prosperity and that create everything that's valuable in life. Then I feel like, for me at least, I feel compelled that it's my responsibility to start trying to make a difference somehow. So I understand how the game works now. So the game isn't this political game where I just go vote, and when I vote, it changes something. The game is like, I can vote, and I'll vote just for whatever it's worth.
Sure.
But that's not the end all be all. If you're going to want to make a difference, the way you're going to make a difference is through business, through education, through entertainment, by changing the culture. And so you're changing people's minds not to come join your political party, not to come vote the way you want them to vote. You're trying to change people's minds to create a network of red-pilled people who have influence on the culture and who can work together to create documentaries, to create businesses, to start a charity network, to do whatever is necessary to start providing for initially your family, and then your extended family, and then your friends, and then you start locally and you just expand out, and you try basically building the governance structure of the future. I think that's where those are the two alternatives you have. You can invest yourself in building the future governance system that the earth will use, or you completely check out, you keep your head down, and you just try to avoid getting knocked off.
Right.
And I think that latter strategy is ultimately going to wind up getting you knocked off. I think you're
always ceding ground.
Right.
So if you're someone who completely disassociates from society, let's say you build a community that's independent, in by all measures, it's going well. If you ignore everything else that's happening, in quote unquote the real world, eventually it's going to affect you, it seems.
Right.
So I mean, I know people who are like for real agorists, and they see themselves as like left. They see themselves as like true left. So like if I reference the left today, they don't want to hear it, because it's like, that's not the left. Because I think they're like, I don't know if they would say it that way, but like I think they at least have the idea that something happened with the left. I mean, it got co-opted by the right, infiltrated by the right, or whatever. But they just know that when they call themselves the left, they're not talking about anything to speak of about what's going on today with the left that people talk about in libertarian circles. But anyway, and they have their communities, and they're independent. But as this shit grows, they're going to be seen as right-wing lunatics. People are going to come after them,
right?
In some sense. So,
and eventually, I mean, you're talking about your eventually going to be dealing with, I mean, you've got like riots in the streets, you've got all this kind of stuff. But like that type of person, you can go full Amish. Like the Amish would basically be the model, I think, if you're going to try to be that type of person.
Right.
Like you're not going to be able to be like wealthy and successful and influential, and you can't be that type of person. You have to be invisible. You have to be completely invisible, completely checked out. You can't be having public conversations about your beliefs and your values. Like that's not going to be an option for you. You have to be completely checked out and off the grid. And these people don't want to do that. And really, it's like these people you're talking about who call themselves left, they're still operating in that old frame. These are the people who need to update their political operating system, because they're operating within the liberal perspective, which is itself a left-wing political. It is the American political system is a left-wing political system because it's a political system that's rooted in representation of the people and the people having a voice. That itself is a left-wing concept. It's an egalitarian concept. Now there can be a right-wing angle on that left-wing system. And that's what basically republicanism is like, or fascism would be like the furthest right-wing angle on that left-wing system. And then communism would be the left end of the left-wing system. Right. But these people who see themselves as, well, I'm left, but I want to be, I'm going to be an agorist. I want to be left alone. They're not left wing. That's not a left wing belief. That's not a left wing system of thought or a left wing frame of mind. That's I want to be left alone to tend to myself, and I want to be free to take care of my own people and not be messed with by other people. That's a right wing concept. That's a right wing value. Right. But yeah, so this is the big thing that libertarians need to understand is like history didn't start at the Constitution. History started well before then, and the Constitution is just like when these people are operating within this context, the entire libertarian political view right now is on the playing field of the progressives. We are playing their game. We're using their terminology. We're allowing them to set the terms of the debate, and we're defining ourselves with respect to them. And it's time for libertarians to stop defining themselves with respect to the state. They are allowing the state to determine who they are and what they're about. And there's more to life than the state. The state is just it's just a tool, and it's like a gun. It's just a tool. And if you act like the state is the problem, it's the same as the people who act like the gun is the problem. It's not the problem. The gun and the state are just the tools. They're not the problem. It's the people who are using them that's the problem. Right.
When I was a younger man, I had multiple legal issues. Both of them were fairly severe. You're severe enough to be worried about. And I remember my lawyer looked at me, and I never forgot it. And he said, "You have to deal with the bear in front of you." And I was like, oh shit, you might be right. And so I think I don't know how long, but it seemed like the state to libertarians was the bear, just the state period. And if we're looking at it now, that might not be the bear in front of us explicitly. Right. Yeah. It's
like the teeth of the bear.
Right.
If you're fighting the bear, like you're concerned about his teeth, but his teeth aren't the thing that's attacking you. It's his brain. Like you want to go to the brain of the bear. If we're going to play with the analogy. Right. And the state is the teeth, but the brain is the people that are using it, the people who are behind it. This is the whole idea that Trump and Biden are equally bad and that really the state is the problem and we need limited government and all of this. This is all extremely blue-pilled thinking, and it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how human social structures develop. This is the thing that I've been learning. I've been realizing and understanding. Like, I think it's really valuable and useful to think of humans as think of them as like ants or like bees. Like think of them as a social creature and just evaluate them scientifically. Take the word should out of your vocabulary, right, and just evaluate them for what they are, exactly as they are. How do they act? How do they behave? What are their tendencies?
Mhm.
And what you'll realize is that for all of your individualist values, you're a collective being.
Yes.
Human beings are collective creatures. They exist just within a collective. They're not isolated. They don't operate individually. Human beings aren't capable of individual thought. Human beings don't have free will. Human beings are programmed. They operate according to their programming. And certain people figure out how to work that programming, how to program that programming. And they're the ones who guide and dictate what happens. And they can enact influence on the world through the state or through a private company, through a movie, through a TV show, through music, through all kinds of different things. The state is just one small part of it. And these people actually use this obsession with the state as like I remember my uncle was talking about my grandpa used to hunt out in Idaho a lot. And there's a bird out there called a grouse. It's kind of like a quail. And grouse are really, really dumb birds. And one thing that my grandpa used to do is he would walk up, they'd be like sitting like on a tree branch or something. And he'd walk up to him, he'd pull his hat off and he'd wave his hat in front of it and reach around behind it and grab it. That's what the state is. The state is used as this hat that's waved in front of you while you get your ass grabbed from behind.
Right.
That's how they appeal to. This is why you'll see people like Nick Fuentes will talk about libertarians and he'll say stuff that's like, you know, the libertarians are the fans of the big corporations. They're just running cover for the corporations or whatever. The first few times I heard it, I was like, what is this weird little dude talking about? That doesn't make any sense at all. I realized what it is. They use this language. They use the language of, free markets. We have to have free markets. You can't regulate the big companies. They use this language as a cover to be able to accomplish whatever they want through the companies rather than through the state. It's like if you're gonna focus on the state and be like, all right, you're not gonna get me. They're like, all right, well, I'll just get you through this angle over here. Right. So they're coming through Google and Twitter and Facebook and Apple because you're looking at the state.
I don't think libertarians are aware that they can also be used as useful idiots.
Right.
I think that's a very difficult thing for libertarians to get their head around.
Because they see themselves as the enlightened ones.
As the smartest people in the room, always. Right. And so with the ants, and guilty, by the way. Yeah. As far as the ants go, I think there's in kind of keeping with that, there's a real libertarian impulse to view humans as ants, certainly, but not themselves. Like they're certainly not an ant, you know what I mean? Right. So a lot of that framework about voting and the enemy of the state and every politician is the same and all that kind of outdated stuff, that gives cover for being able to sort of remove yourself from the colony and just observe the colony as if you're not in it somehow, for better or for worse, in the thick of that colony yourself and affected by everything that's going on. And so, if you keep your mind in 2012, it all seems to be come back to 2012. Like this is sort of a conversation that's happened spontaneously. But if you keep it in line of like Mitt Romney and Barack Obama are the same. So it doesn't matter. Okay. And then, no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain, and fair enough. And like that seemed to like be relatively true. And John McCain, by the way, is the same as Hillary Clinton and such. And you realize that like, okay, I don't explicitly disagree with any of that. However, you'll notice that all four of those people can't stand Donald Trump. So the math doesn't work if you're trying to throw him into that mindset to give you cover for not voting or not needing to think or not consider that question. Like, even if you take the voting out of it, if a groundhog picked the president, is it okay for you to have a preference of whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden? It's like, if you want to take the voting is violence aspect out of it, it's like, let's remove all the typical things that, a libertarian would say and just examine it as like a matter of fact. And like what's going on.
Because one of them is going to be president.
Absolutely.
Like, it doesn't matter how much you dislike them. It doesn't matter how much this is a very distinctly libertarian thing, dealing with the abstracting the world out, saying, okay, here's the real world. Let me abstract it out. Think of this in the abstract and think of how things should be. This is how things are, but let's think of how things should be and then figure out, okay, in an ideal situation, this is how it would work. Therefore, I'm going to behave as if this is the ideal situation. And it's like, I'm going to manifest it or something. I'm just going to manifest that both of them are evil and they're both bad, and I'm not going to vote and I'm not going to be involved, and I'm too good for it. I'm going to hold my nose and not do anything. And magically I'm going to wind up with nobody being president. Like, other people are just going to, if I check out and I don't engage, then other people are going to do the same. And then, it's like that meme where it's like step 1, blah, 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 step 2, question mark, step 3, profit. It's like they have this thing like, well, I'm going to abstain because I don't believe in this. And it's, I don't consent.
Sure. Yeah.
The system doesn't give a shit if you don't consent.
Right. And it's probably, the system's probably happier if the people who may actually be smarter than other people abstain from it and don't consent, because, they're taking themselves out of it. One of these two assholes is going to be president. In some part, it is going to be decided by voting. In some part.
And I'll even go so far as I'll say that I have probably 50% confidence that the actual outcome of the election will be determined by the votes that were cast. Right. Like, I think it's probably 50-50. I'm not even totally confident that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
So for me, voting for Trump is a symbolic thing. It's kind of like I'm doing it for the fun of it. But the reason why I wanted to make this video is because, and the reason why you wanted me to make this video was because it's not that we want to make a difference and get extra people to vote for Trump and be the difference that, like, we're talking like 140 million people are going to vote, and it might even be more because it seems like turnout's going to be astronomical this year.
Right.
We're going to have a few hundred people are going to see this video. We're not actually trying to make a difference in that sense. We're not trying to get people to think, okay, well, voting is the solution. We want people to start thinking about this whole process differently. The whole mindset that leads you to say, oh, I'm not going to vote because the two people they're both the same, they're both equally bad. The process that leads you to think that way is a mind virus. It's a destructive mind virus that has you relating to the world in a way that's not conducive to your ultimate success. You think that you're taking steps that are going to lead to the world you want to see, and you're not. Just because you are trying to create a certain outcome with the steps that you're taking doesn't mean that you're going to create that outcome. And right now, libertarians have a broken understanding of how the political system works. And even more, they have a broken understanding of the limitations of the political system, how irrelevant the political system is. And I understand the irony of saying the political system is irrelevant, that's why I'm going to vote for Trump. But again, like me voting for Trump is, I'm doing it for the fun of it, and I'm doing it so that I can say I voted for him. And just because really it's just to make a clickbait title. Like, that's the reason why I'm voting for him.
Right.
But I want to get people thinking in a different way about all of this. I want to get people thinking about how human societies organize themselves and how the structure of power works within our society. Because the structure of power within our society most definitely does not begin with the politicians. The politicians are like the final step. All of the power starts behind them and it leads up to them. So who the actual president is means very little in terms of the functioning of the political system. Who the president is makes a huge difference in terms of the culture that that ultimately defines the political system. Right. So in this particular case, Glenn Greenwald, let me pull this tweet up. Glenn Greenwald had this really good tweet the other day where he said, if Biden wins, that's going to be the power structure. A Democratic Party fully united with neocons, Bush-Cheney operatives, CIA, FBI, NSA, Wall Street, and Silicon Valley, all presenting themselves as the only protection against fascism, and much of the left will continue marching behind it. That sort of scenario, compared with a scenario where Trump is the president and has this huge platform to get ideas out and to run interference, like I can't even imagine someone preferring that former scenario to the latter. So like I was telling you earlier, I'll say this last thing, let you say something. I was telling you earlier when we were talking about this, that I don't see Trump as my savior. I don't see Trump as a messiah. I think the people who do are goofy. I think that they're just as blue-pilled as the people who think that there's no difference between the two of them. I don't see Trump as my messiah. I see Trump as like a speed bump in the way of these people who want to radically transform the structure of our society. I see him as the chair that I'm jamming underneath the doorknob to hold the door shut for a little longer while I escape out the back door on the other side of the room while all the people are trying to break the door down. That's who Trump is to me. And I don't, to me, the idea that you would be like, oh, who cares if Biden's elected? To me, that's like saying, these people are running and chasing me, and I'm not even going to shut the door. I'm just going to leave the door open.
And with that presumed cabinet that Greenwald was talking about, you know, even if you're just a strict anti-war libertarian, I don't think between Trump and Biden-Harris that there's any contest. Like just like in 2016, it seemed reasonable that you could hope that that Trump was going to be more of an anti-war president than Clinton. If you put these two against each other this year, even just for like a minute looking at the war aspect of it, it doesn't seem to be a question at all. But that's not, oddly enough, that's not even kind of the biggest problem. You know, the thing that's staring everybody down now is the fact that just culturally, like you were saying, you've got one candidate who is you know, kind of in lockstep with this you know, tiny authoritarian political figure, you know, posing as a scientist or a doctor, talking about life getting back to normal in 2022. And then you've got someone else who goes on Twitter and makes fun of him for not being able to throw a baseball, which is like trite, perhaps, but like I want that guy because I want that in the discussion at least.
Yes. Without Trump out there talking shit about Fauci and making fun of him, what prominent right-wing voice would there be that was impacting the conversation in any way? Right. This whole war issue, and people say, oh, Trump didn't change any. Trump did more drone strikes. Trump, blah, 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 whatever. Okay, here's your choices. The candidate that openly embraces war and like expands war indiscriminately, or the one who doesn't do a whole lot to change the status quo, but openly criticizes war and talks it down and describes all of the downsides of it all the time.
Right.
Those are your two alternatives. So what you're telling me is that you would rather have the one who openly embraces it than have the one who's talking shit about it and at least changing little things, even if he's just changing little things around the margins. You don't have a third alternative. There isn't another choice. It's just these two.
Right. Even the lip service that, you know, he seems to pay to an anti-war message, even if the words are hollow, just the fact that they're out there. I mean, he has said things that I don't remember hearing another president say, like when he was debating about what the casualties would be if they did a strike in Iran and kind of backing down from that. I hadn't heard anyone talk like that.
Right.
Man, I think it was like sometime around Super Bowl, he was talking with like Bill O'Reilly or something with, and he was saying, he said on like national television, it's like, you know, America's done some really terrible stuff. If I'm just looking at pluses and minuses, I think that's worth having it in the conversation. And in terms of like an outlet for right-wing thought, and, you know, I mean, anything that isn't explicitly progressive is going to be considered right-wing anyway. But where's all this frustration going to go if it doesn't have the vent of a voice, you know, like Trump's Twitter?
Yes.
It's just going to go more, because like, where are people going to go? I mean, they're going to be driven kind of into the shadows, and that usually doesn't go well. Right.
That's a really good point. Like if your fear, say you're one of these libertarians that's more lefty and your fear is right-wing extremists, do you want those right-wing extremists to feel like, hey, at least we have our daddy in the White House who can own the libs from his Twitter account? Or do you want them feeling like there's absolutely nothing? We have no voice whatsoever. We have no hope. We're completely hosed. Which position do you want them in? Because those are your two alternatives. Right. And with the war thing, like you said, would you rather have a president that's paying lip service to an anti-war message or a president who's not? Those are your two choices. Like people will say, oh, you can't give me, I reject it. That's a forced choice. It doesn't have to be that way. I don't give a shit if it doesn't have to be that way. It is that way. Right. This is the life that you have, that you're living right now. There isn't an alternative. There isn't an ideal hypothetical alternative that just exists in your imagination. You have this life right here, which is the president who pays lip service to anti-war or the president who doesn't. I'll take the one who pays lip service to anti-war. And he seems to meet occasionally with Rand Paul. And I don't know if he's just an impressionable guy, but it seems to stay with him for at least a couple hours, like long enough for him to make some kind of a tweet. Yeah. And long enough for I think Rand Paul does a good job of also putting it out there in the discussion. I met with the president and, what a great guy. He's thinking about, doing some real anti-war stuff. Isn't he the coolest guy that you know? Which is like trying to use positive reinforcement to get him to do what you want. Yes. It's I've heard from a number of people that Trump is very impressionable. It's kind of like he's going to opt with whoever talked to him last. And I think that's like the CEO side of him. That's just kind of like, all right, I'm going to surround myself by advisors. Make your case. Whoever makes their case the best, that's the one I'm going to go for, because he's truly not ideological. He doesn't have a bent one way or the other. He's like, whoever makes the best case for me, that's what we're going to do. Because we've got to do something. So you make your case. Okay, cool. You make your case. Right. You made a good case. Let's do that. Well, I think the one plus side is that, Kamala Harris will be routinely meeting with Rand Paul and taking all his ideas to heart. So that's something that points to a positive for voting Biden. So that's exactly the same as Trump. Right. I'm immediately rethinking everything. But if you're a political party, the purpose of your existence is to get votes. The purpose of your existence is not to spread your values. The purpose of your existence is to get votes, because votes are power. And when you get power, then you spread your values using your power. Right. So if we want the Libertarian Party to have any power or any influence, it needs to have as many votes as possible. And people will be like, oh, if we water it down, then what have we accomplished? Now you realize why politics isn't the avenue that you think it is. Yeah. That's exactly the point. You're never going to accomplish that through politics. So stop trying to use politics for something that it's not good for. Use it for something that it is good for, which is fucking with the totalitarian, insane people who are tearing apart the culture. Right. And try to focus on bringing about the future that you want through the avenues where it actually happens, which is through the culture. And you're going to do that through business, through education, through entertainment, and through technology and building. This is where the TED pill has got me thinking. But building through technology to try to, whatever the future governance structure is, whether it's going to be like Moldbug's vision of a joint stock corporation, or if it's going to be a true monarchy, or if it's going to be just the dissolution of large national states and down to a smaller size, like on the state level or something, or if it's going to be cities that are owned and operated by a king, and then a bunch of open wild territory. Like, I don't know what the structure of it's going to be, but if people start thinking about it now, they can be the ones who build it. And that's where I want liberty-minded people being now, not in the business of trying to change the political world and try to take over the Libertarian Party or whatever. I want them to be in the business of creating the culture of the future through media and through education and through business. I want them to have money. Libertarians need to not be a bunch of poor little neckbeards. Libertarians need to be wealthy, powerful people. Only then will they have an actual influence on the outcome. Like, the one thing I was really stoked on in 2016, aside from the hope that it's like, maybe this guy actually does have some anti-war impulses, but he wasn't supposed to be there, like, at all. Like, even if
someone who doesn't really pay attention to politics or culture or anything like that, but like is comfortable with the concept of like they, but doesn't really know what it means. Mm-hmm. Just like whoever they didn't want Trump.
Right,
and he fucking got in there. So basically it proves that, like, let's say you had a candidate who was anti-Fed and anti-war and, actually not just what, libertarians maybe wanted to project onto Donald Trump. You actually had like a quality candidate. It is possible. You can infiltrate a system that does have power, the existing power structure of the political system. It is possible that you can infiltrate that and you can become president. Mm-hmm. But if you'll notice, Trump has wealth and influence, wealth and power
and influence.
Right, yeah, I say, plug the podcast. Yeah. But I mean, it's important. It's just like, no, it can't be like a naked guy, like running on stage,
right. That's a good segue though into so say you were to actually get to that position where you were a Trump and you had the ability to try to take over the political system, and what sort of this is where I want libertarians thinking. This is what I think would. I say that I want to make sure I'm clear here. I understand that when I say this is what I want libertarians thinking, it makes me sound like a dickhead. Like I know that sounds like who am I to try to dictate what libertarians think? The reason I say this is because I'm passionate about this subject and I want to see libertarians be effective. Right. I want to see them stop playing around in the mud and actually get out and start changing something, start doing something positive, because I think the world is suffering for their lack of influence. And through the last few years of working with Jason and discovering how there's being embedded in marketing and copywriting and persuasion and all of that, and realizing, like, learning how human psychology operates when it comes to marketing and sales. And like when you're trying to ask someone for a sale, when you're trying to sell them on something, how do you do that? How do you tap into their psychology? How do you frame things in a way that's going to be appealing to them? Because ultimately what you're trying to do in politics is the same as what you're trying to do when you're selling a product. In politics, you are selling a product. If you're trying to appeal to people in a democratic system, if they're not buying what you're selling, that's on you. It's up to you to ensure that what you're selling is something that's going to be appealing to them. The problem with the libertarian message as it appeals to libertarians is that it doesn't appeal to anyone else. And if the entire world were libertarians, we wouldn't need a libertarian party. Right. Because if people were already capable of self-government, then you wouldn't need a government. So the entire world is never going to be libertarians. So a libertarian party and a libertarian political message is never going to be successful. It's never going to accomplish what you want it to accomplish, because when you say liberty to most people, they don't understand really what that means, or it has a negative connotation to them. Someone having liberty to do as they please is terrifying to the majority of people. Sure. This is the H.L. Mencken quote, that the majority of people don't want freedom, they want security.
Right.
And the libertarian political message is offering freedom to people who don't want it. And right. Because they don't want it, they're never going to buy it. So if you were a libertarian who wanted to become palatable politically, because you decide that that's the avenue that you want to take, you need to offer something to people that they want. And what do people want? People want security, and they want to be protected. They want to be provided for. They want stability. They want they want happiness. They want people to be happy and prosperous. Like, these are the types of things that people want. So then the question is, how do you get those things? Where does prosperity and security and stability, where does that come from? That comes from order. It comes from the law. And this is this was the big red pill for me, is realizing that if you want to have liberty, you must first have order. Without order, you can't have liberty. Right. The opposite of liberty is chaos. In chaos, you don't have liberty. In chaos, because if everyone has liberty, nobody has it. You can't have everybody free to do as they please. Liberty is not a free-for-all. It's not every man for himself. And libertarians would recognize this. They're like, well, that's not what, we're not advocating for Somalia. Mm-hmm. And this is the big criticism that libertarians always get really tired of dealing with, is people thinking that you're just advocating for a crazy wasteland of people duking it out like Mad Max.
Even if you instituted Anarcho-Capitalism tomorrow, the culture that we have would not support it. I like, no matter where you stand politically, I think you can look around. I was going to say that you can watch the news, but that's let's not. But you can like look around and observe the world, and you can see that just like character-wise, culturally, like
to be able
the culture wouldn't support it.
Yes. Yeah. And let's break that down. Let's break down why it wouldn't. Because for a culture to be able to support Anarcho-Capitalism, you have to have a number of things. But chief among them is you have to have high trust. The people have to trust each other, because you can't have a successful, autonomous, self-governing society full of people who are suspicious of each other and at each other's throats. Because getting back to the ant analogy, the way that people operate, because most people want security, and because most people aren't capable of independent thought, people in large groups will always delegate away their own sovereignty to the strongest person who offers to protect them. This is why every human society will always be governed by a small number of elites. You can call it, and you can call it the Pareto principle.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. So 80-20 rule, 90-10 rule, and it works fractally. So 80% of the population will be governed by 20% of the population. That 20%, within that 20% will have the most power and influence. Within that 20% will have the most power and influence. So, this principle holds all the way up to the top. So every human society will organize itself hierarchically. So
just by nature.
So the whole idea of having a completely decentralized society is fundamentally at odds with human nature.
Sure.
Humans will always centralize.
And when you start messing with, and it's like just pervasive throughout society, but any time that you try to disturb that, it's the same thing with like, income inequality, or, when people see, it's like, well, there's a certain amount of people that are very rich. I'm like, yes.
Because there's a certain amount of people that are very competent. And competence attracts wealth.
When you start disturbing that, whether it's, there's always unintended consequences that are usually worse than the problem that you're trying to solve. And I think, when you do it with power, you get it to the point where power is in all these abstract places, and it's just spread out everywhere, and it gives people cover to denying that they have. Then that's the whole game that gets played, right?
Yes, that's Lord Acton. This is a realization I had recently that I think that it's true. I'm pretty sure that it's true that Lord Acton was wrong. That power does not corrupt. Unaccountable power corrupts. So power and responsibility are synonyms. If you have responsibility, you have the power. If you have the power, you have the responsibility. If you abdicate that responsibility, but you retain the power, that's corruption. Corruption is power without consequences. And the product of attempting to limit government is creating government that's unaccountable. Because the idea with limited government was supposed to be that all the different parts of government would hold each other accountable. and really it's like the people are supposed to limit government, but government is supposed to be the thing that limits. Like if you're establishing a government, you're establishing a government for the sake of creating limits. You're saying people can't just it can't just be a free for all. People can't just go about doing whatever. So we're going to establish a government. So here I'm preaching to the choir to an ANCAP, but to the people that to the minarchists or conservatives or whatever who are like, well, we need to have a limited government, the Constitution, yada yada yada. The whole term limited government is an oxymoron because government is the thing that limits. So if you have limited government, well, what's doing the limiting? Because whatever's doing the limiting, that's the thing that's the government. So then in the case of a democratically representative government, are we saying that so the people are the ones who limit it? So the people are the ones who limit the government, which limits the people. You've created this circle that just keeps going around and around, and the people who occupy that government now are able to offset responsibility from themselves endlessly without ever being accountable for the power that they're wielding. This is the buck never stops anywhere within a liberal representative government. Liberal representative governments are ultimately unaccountable, which means they're ultimately fundamentally corrupt. They're the very definition of corruption.
Can you imagine? I mean, so like if you're at a social gathering, right? Well, we could say Thanksgiving because that's like the go-to example for political conversations not needing to occur or whatever. But I mean, if you were at Thanksgiving 2019 and you cornered a couple cousins and you said, man, the road that we're headed down right now, you're going to have governors tweeting out restrictions for what we can do at a holiday like this. They're going to be telling you how loud you can sing and can't sing, and even if you can be inside, and if you're dying of some kind of an asthma attack, you can use your inhaler. You will be allowed to take the mask that you're mandated to wear off and use your inhaler. Can you imagine what a psychopath that they would think that you were?
Even if you'd been telling another libertarian that.
Right. Yeah.
They would have been like, in a year?
Like, right, slow down.
All right, Alex Jones.
Yes. And it's manifesting itself in reality, like before our eyes. Yeah. And
so what's going to happen? How are things going to be a year from now?
I was visiting a friend in Orlando who has small children. And I was talking with him and it just kind of hit me. It was like, they don't know any other way of life for them. Like, this is normal for them. And he said, I tell them every day that this is not normal. Like, we're not living in, normal times. This is abnormal, and it's wrong. But to their actual experience, no matter what he says, this for them is normal. If there is any kind of hedge against that, I think it's important to embrace it, whatever it is. It comes in the form of, Trump tweeting out that a guy who's a significant part of it can't throw a baseball, then that is what it is.
On one hand, you have a presidential candidate who, if he's elected, I'm like 100% confident you're going to have UN FEMA camps in the United States next year that are like for people, like quarantine camps for people who have the virus.
Right.
On the flip side, you have a president who, if he's elected, there might be FEMA camps, UN FEMA camps next year. So I'll take the might be over the for sure.
B.
Now, I will say this.
Enthusiastically B.
Right. I will say this. I can see a reality where it's the other way around, and I think a lot of people would argue that it would be the other way around. That if Biden was elected, they would immediately relax everything. They would let it all go because now they need to engineer an economic recovery because they don't want to have mass unrest. And that what it would be is if Trump is elected, then Democrats are going to they're going to try to go over his head, get the United Nations to step in, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
I don't think that's the case. I don't buy this idea that if Biden's elected, everything is going to fizzle out and all the riots are going to stop. People are going to go back to normal. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. I don't buy that at all. I think if Biden is elected, this radical left-wing cultural insurgency is going to be massively emboldened. And they're going to see this as a mandate from the American people, as the American people sanctioning what they've been doing, saying, yeah, good job, keep it up. In fact, we're giving you a mandate to purge the country of fascists.
Right.
And we're going to see the pack in the court is going to be the least of it. You're talking about like them creating a new Bill of Rights. They're going to be like, what, the Constitution is done, and we need to create a new Bill of Rights. Now, don't get me wrong. I think the Constitution is essentially irrelevant because the United States has had 3 different constitutions in effect basically since then. We're governed now essentially by like an unwritten and formal constitution. That constitution existing still just kind of provides at least a sense of cover for maintaining certain traditions like freedom of speech and the Second Amendment and stuff. But those things aren't persisting because of the Constitution. Those things are just persisting because people haven't decided to get rid of them yet. If the people with the power decided to get rid of them, they would be gone tomorrow. The only thing that's holding them back is just kind of having the feeling like they have the will of the American people behind them, or at least a sufficient percentage that they can get it done. I think that a Biden election, they would take that as a mandate from the American people that we need to expire the Constitution and move into a new system of governance, a new world order, effectively. And
right.
So I don't buy the idea that a Biden election is just going to fizzle out all of the energy on the other side. I do buy the idea that a Trump election is going to be contested tooth and nail. They're obviously laying the groundwork for it. They're obviously setting up for it. And I think that a likely step would be them treating him as if he's not an elected president, but a guy who's been voted out and is attempting to hold on to office and appealing to the United Nations to step in and overthrow him. I could see that being a possible outcome. But I don't think that they have the support. I don't think they have sufficient support from the populace to do that. I think that would be a bridge too far right now.
Then the one thing with any of those scenarios would be if Trump is in office for whatever reason, intentional or otherwise, the hypocrisy and the underlying just surreptitious nature of everything going on will be more on display, because that's just what he brings, which I think there's a value to that, especially if the goal is red pilling people or bring people around to your way of thought. I mean, there's a value there.
Right.
I tried to run the devil's advocate, scenario. I thought it's like, the coronavirus maybe disappears tomorrow if Biden is elected, and it's because we finally have an adult in the office who listens to the science, and thanks to that, the coronavirus has gone away and we can go back to normal. And then I kind of stopped, and 2 things happened. I told you about both of them, but I had the idea. It's like, when has the phrase, "Okay, that's good enough, we'll take a break," like, when has that ever been said by anything in the world of a progressive? And then the other one was a YouTube ad that Obama was talking, and he started talking about we can only keep this momentum going if we elect a Biden or something. I think there's a significant amount of people that are out there that really do think they're doing not the Lord's work, but the Lord's work, and are ready to kick it into gear. And if there was a Trump victory, you're not going to get anything in the way of introspection out of that. Like, we've been down that road. That's not happening.
No.
But it might give them pause, or might be like a blow to the morale for a second, that maybe we can get something together.
Right. That's my hope. That's my hope, is that a Trump election, I know that the psychological effects of a Trump election would be, first of all, it would be really encouraging and emboldening and eye-opening to his support, because it's really easy to think, okay, he was elected in 2016 by a bunch of people that were just kind of like, don't really like this guy, but we'll just give it a shot and see what happens. Ever since then, they've just been horrified and shocked, and it's just the worst thing ever, and they regret it all, and they're ready to just move on. And try to get things back to normal. That's a really easy story to tell yourself. If he's elected again, that will, it means that 2016 was not an outlier. 2016 wasn't the exception. 2016 was the new rule. And I think that will really change the perception of a lot of people in the country from seeing, from like right-wing, conservative, libertarian, those types of people. I think it will make them stop seeing themselves as underdogs so much. They'll start recognizing that there's a lot more people out there who at least approximately value the same type of world as them than they realized. And I think that it will be a big psychological lift to the nation. At the same time, I think that the people you're talking about, the people who Obama is speaking to, they're going to lose their shit. And I think they're going to be demoralized, but they're also going to be radicalized. And I think that that's inevitable. I think that that has to happen. It's just kind of fast tracking it. But I would rather them be radicalized and feel desperate than be radicalized and feel emboldened. Feel like they've now got the mandate of the American people. Because what they're going to, if that happens with a Biden election, they're going to feel as if, like on a personal level, they're going to feel like it's my job to purge the world of fascists and ensure that something like Trump never, ever happens again. The entire political system is going to be locked down, and totalitarianism is going to expand like in a massive way, because they're going to see that as their opening. So you're going to get this. This is kind of a peek into the way that the political system actually operates. It's those radical, progressive lefties who conservatives and libertarians like to roll their eyes at because they think they're so dumb. They're the ones who are driving the frickin' bus, because they set the agenda. The moderate establishment, Democrats, Republicans, that's the part where it's essentially the same. The establishment types, the Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi types, they are the ones who say, okay, you guys set the agenda. We're going to get there. Just give us a minute. And they're the ones who kind of rein things in and allow, they keep the American people from getting too freaked out as we follow in the footsteps of the AOCs and the Ayanna Presleys and the Ilhan Omars. But those are the ones who are setting the agenda. And then the Republicans just kind of are along for the ride, and they just yell and scream like they hope that it's not going to happen, but they're not actually going to do anything to stop it. But so those are the people that are ultimately going to set the agenda, and they're the ones who are going to see like, hey, it's our job to rid the world of fascists. And then the established powers that be are going to say, well, it just so happens that pursuing your line of thought massively expands our power and influence. So we're going to pretend to be along the ride with this whole woke shit. And, it just conveniently happens to really insulate us from any future threats to our power. So that there would be why I just can't imagine why someone would be like, oh, the Trump versus Biden, there's no big difference. I don't think that one's going to be good. I don't think that there's a positive outcome, but I think there's one that's much worse. And I think that Biden being reelected would be much worse.
Are there resources that, like a primer for somebody who is looking to kind of get into that way of thought and kind of expand upon those ideas?
Yeah, the guy that really got me thinking along all these lines was Mencius Moldbug. That's a screen name of a blogger. He's a tech founder, entrepreneur named Curtis Yarvin. He had a blog that he wrote called Unqualified Reservations. And that blog is really where he laid out trying to think of exactly how to introduce this concept. There's a system of thought called neo-reactionary. It's NRX is the abbreviation for it. And these are right-wing guys who it's kind of a post-libertarian perspective where they've realized that libertarians have described the ideal world to live in, but they have no idea how to actually get there. And so the neo-reactionaries are starting to look at how you actually wind up with that kind of outcome. They're thinking about politics in a science, like kind of as a science, to kind of take the morals, take the shoulds and stuff out of it, because those can be really distracting, and just, again, treat it kind of like you're looking at an ant colony. How does this organism arrange itself? And if I wanted these organisms to arrange themselves in this particular way, what sort of environment is necessary for them to arrange themselves that way? And it just so happens that when you start studying human organization and the nature of power and how power progresses and develops through human hierarchies, human organizational hierarchies, you start recognizing patterns, and you realize that there are you need specific phenomena present to be able to achieve a libertarian outcome, a libertarian society. And it's kind of a radical. It'll kind of rattle you when you start reading it, when you start kind of coming to grips with some of these ideas. Like I know, Stephen, I had that one video series that I recommended to you, and you watched it, and we should probably link to that. Whoever people get this, we should link to both the first video by the Distributist on the introduction to Mencius Moldbug, and then the Anamnesis video series. But it's like, what was the impact on you when you first started watching them?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I had seen podcasts with Curtis Yarvin, real name of Mencius Moldbug, and it's my own bias, I guess, to like a certain way of speaking or whatever. But I mean, being completely honest, and I think he's brilliant now. But on the podcast that I first saw him on, I had a real hard time listening. And when you sent me that stuff, I was like, oh man, here we go. But when I started listening to it, I don't know how someone can attempt to understand the moment that we're living in right now without giving that playlist a listen and kind of getting those concepts. Because I mean, it's not a secret that libertarianism. I was like, okay, we've got the best ideas. All right, fair enough. We've got the ideal society. And it's like, well, there's obviously a major character problem, that prevents us from living in it, as well as any number of other roadblocks. And there's no how. There's just no how. And libertarians, I think, will readily admit it. They have no idea how to get there, how to organize. Well, why don't we have the how? There's things that you're probably not taking into consideration.
Right. And that right there is the misunderstanding of how humans organize each other, the misunderstanding of the nature of human societies, and a misunderstanding of the nature of power, how power works. I think you're absolutely right that you can't, it's hard for me to take anyone serious, just to seriously value anyone's insight into current events if they haven't been exposed to the neo-reactionary perspective, specifically Moldbug. Another good resource would be, it's a little heavier, but the book The Machiavellians by James Burnham. The Machiavellians, like Machiavelli is kind of a pejorative. I'd always heard it that way. I'd always understood it to be kind of a synonym for evil, for like evil schemers. And there's people who use Machiavellian tactics are often using it for negative, for like evil reasons. People do employ Machiavellianism for evil reasons, but they do it because it works. They do it because this is an effective, adaptive way of looking at the world. And if something works, I don't just want the evil people using it. I want the good people using it as well. So the biggest realization is that power is not power, but violence is inevitable. That everything is secured by violence. Civilization rests upon violence. Civilization is secured by violence or the threat of violence. Because when you think about your property, you say, "Oh, I have a property right. I have, this is my house. I own this house." Well, what does that mean? It means that everyone around you agrees that they're not going to take it from you.
Right.
You've created that agreement. and with the understanding that if they try, you're going to use violence against them.
Mm-hmm.
So really, it's just a power struggle. It's that you have mutually agreed to not engage in this power struggle.
I knew I was drawn to libertarianism, but when people started talking about, natural rights, I wasn't really sold on the idea because, like, okay, so you have a right to your life. It's like, well, I don't think I do. I prefer to be alive most times, but I don't think I have a right to it per se, and I can't unless the only way I was able to cross the bridge is like, okay, God gave you these rights. It's like, okay, well, that's one way to square the circle, I guess. But in terms of just like super practical, and I would ask questions even years ago. What if I'm a libertarian, but I don't think rights exist? You have a right to life. Well, if someone chops your head off, where's your right to life? You
only have rights to the extent that you can protect them, or that someone else can protect them for you. Mm-hmm. So then it comes down to the capacity for violence or the capacity for force, and that's all the non-aggression principle is saying. Is just that if someone commits an act of aggression, they have opened themselves up, or they've created like a violence deficit that needs to be made up. Like there's now a violence credit, and there needs to be an according debit to make up for it. So if I come and steal your horse, then now under the system of agreed laws, you have a right to come use force against me to take the horse back, or to extract money out of me, or extract labor out of me to make up for it, or whatever. That's all. The non-aggression principle isn't saying this is how you should behave. It's just saying, if this is what you want, then this is the rule. So if what you want is mutual respect of private property, then the way that works is you follow the non-aggression principle, that if somebody violates your property, then you have the right to violate his property back to the extent to recover damages. But this isn't people will say something like, oh, that violates the NAP. And that's just a complete misunderstanding of what the NAP is. The NAP isn't something prescriptive. It's just something descriptive. And so you were right. So when you said that you have a right to life until someone chops your head off, it's like, the only way that rights have any relevance or any bearing is to the extent to which you can protect them, or you can employ someone else to protect them for you. If I come to your house right now and I break into your house and I'm holding you hostage, I'm going to say I'm holding your wife hostage. You are, what are you going to do? You're going to call the cops. So then you don't actually have a first order right to your property. You have a second order right to your property. Someone else is going to come protect your property for you. So really, you don't actually own your property. Whoever owns your property is the person who has the right to come employ violence and protection of it. Now, you might be able to draw a gun and shoot him or whatever, but then that's going to have to be borne out by the courts of law. They're going to have to determine, who is in the right and who is in the wrong. So ultimately, all of the rights are all sorted out by the ultimate power in the region. The ultimate power in the region in this case is the state. So the state owns your rights. So you only have rights to the extent that the state allows you to. If you took the state away, you only have rights to the extent that you can protect your own rights. If somebody comes, if the entire neighborhood decides to turn on you and take your stuff and kill you, you didn't have any rights. You can say, oh, it's against, you're violating my right as you die. And it's like, yeah, it was mean and it sucks, but this is the reality that you have to live with. So if you're trying to build a society from the ground up based on rights, and you're ignoring the fact that society begins with a collection of people who are all agreeing on something, then you're going to be misleading yourself. This society begins when a group of people come together and choose to operate in a given way. That's the nature of society. So human society, whenever you're talking about rights, you're automatically for this is the great irony. Libertarians think that they're individualists, and when they appeal to rights, they're appealing to collectivism. because the only way that you have rights in a society is if the collective agrees to respect and honor your rights.
That was kind of something I was running into when there was started to be a lot of looting and violence. And like, is that how, you know, people truly want society to operate? Is that I have my guns and then someone else has their guns, and then the old woman down the street with the business also has her guns and she's responsible for her, you know, safety?
If you're going to have a this scenario that you set up where you have your guns, your neighbor has his guns, the old lady down the street has her guns, someone else has their guns. This is like libertarians describe this, and they're like, yeah, this is how, you know, everyone should be armed. You could all defend and protect each other. The only way that you can have a successful society that's set up that way is, as I mentioned before, high trust. You all have to trust each other, which means you all have to have a common set of beliefs that you build your society around. You have to have a myth, a shared myth that you build your society around, which is what a religion is. Mm-hmm. So effectively, the only way that you can have a society like that is if you have a religious society, that you are all united by a common myth, a common set of beliefs, a common, I can't think of the word I'm looking for here. It's like a romantic story that you all attach yourselves to, that you all find meaning and fulfillment in. You need to have common purpose. If that's the case, then it works to have something like that. Otherwise, if you're like right now, you don't want to live in a society where everyone is armed, because we're such a low trust society with so much chaos, and information is so distorted by the media, by social media. It's hard to know what's what, what's right, what's up, what's down. You don't want to live in a massively armed society in that sense, because it's ultimately a recipe for chaos, and there isn't an order that's constraining everything, and that's not going to naturally develop in the way that you want it to. If you're a libertarian, there will be an order that naturally develops, but what it will be is a group of people, starting with the weakest people, will band together for the sake of protection, and they will offer to cede some of their own rights to a stronger, more powerful person in return for protecting them. And then that's how your government will begin. Your government is always going to begin with something like that, with the weakest people banding together and giving over power to a stronger person. And there's nothing that you can do about that. So rather than trying to say, no, you can't have a government, get rid of the government, don't have a government, instead of that, be the ones providing the government. Libertarians need to be the ones providing the government for the society. Libertarians need to be the ones who are in the business of providing the security and the meaning and the purpose to the society. That's the only way that you will have a libertarian society. But I know when I'm saying that, it's making your skin crawl. Like libertarians, like anybody who comes from a libertarian, conservative sort of background, that's going to make your skin crawl. Because the idea of being the government, you realize, well, I'm going to, like, to do that, I probably will have to do stuff that violates my principles. But that's where what you were realizing when you were talking about basically how there is no, like, libertarians see themselves as having all the ideas, but it's like they have no impact on things. And it's because libertarianism is not a means. Libertarianism is an end. The libertarian is, you've described the ideal utopian society. But how do you get from point A to point B? You don't get there by following libertarian principles. If you live life as a libertarian, given the nature of human societies, you're going to get ground up by the machine, because you're engaging in political pacifism, and the machine destroys political pacifism. The machine is a center of gravity that's pulling power into it. And by engaging in political pacifism, you are surrendering your power to whatever entity is the biggest and strongest one on the block that's going to just absorb it and take it from you. Because this is the nature of politics. The nature of politics is that it's zero sum. It's all consuming. And if you are not actively acting to affect the outcome, then you are surrendering your sovereignty to it.
So you heard it from Matthew Erickson. Don't be passive. Get out there and vote. MAGA 2020, Trump is dead. Yeah.
Trump is daddy.
It's a whole other way of thinking that's really challenging, which is good.
Right.
Which is good because I don't, libertarians and people in general aren't meant to just like rest on the laurels of whatever philosophy they feel comfortable with, and got them to the point that, because this is the point that we're at. So I would hope that if someone was libertarian, that they're fairly frustrated with what they see around them. You gave me a lot of this stuff, and hopefully this conversation will encourage other people to explore some of those same resources that we were talking about. And if you do so and you just pick off a little bit at a time, I just binged all of it because it just started to just blow my mind. But even if you don't have time to do that, and you just kind of pick off a little bit at a time and like let it sit, I think it's going to fill in a lot of blank spaces for people.
I don't expect people to take this as an exhaustive defense of all of these ideas, because we're limited. Obviously, we can't talk for 10 hours on this, and there's so much to cover. There's so many. This is such a outside the box perspective that I'm still coming to grips with. I'm still I'm far from the expert on all this. These are all just kind of like red pills that have been exploding my brain over the last few months. And I expected, like we talked about as we were sitting down to do this, we were like, this probably isn't going to be a single conversation. Like this is going to have to lead into more conversations, because there's more details and stuff that we have to cover. There's more to the story. Moldbug especially, and then there's a few other thinkers kind of in the same vein, but he has completely changed the way that I have looked at history, the events of history. He kind of gave me a new picture of it, and I realized as he was describing it that it answered a lot of other questions for me, and it really made a lot of sense. It really fit together, and that's probably something I might want to try to cover in a future video if we do another one, is the kind of an alternative perspective of the history of the history of America, the history of the Constitution, the way that all of that developed, because it wasn't. I realized the extent to which my worldview was based upon the progressive narrative, the progressive mythology, where there's the actual events that happened, and then you abstract out people's stories about the events that happened. And it's inevitable that, like, they have the aphorism that says the winners write the history books, or the victors write the history books. And that's what's happened. The standard narrative of history is the one that was written by the winners. And by definition, the winners were the people who are in power today, because the people who win are the people who take power. So if you're just operating based on this set of agreed upon narratives about the nature of the American political system, where it came from, how it got to where it is today, again, you're playing on the playing field of the people who you claim are your enemies. They're the ones who have established the narrative. And I think that we need to take back the narrative. And that starts with telling the story of the losers, because the losers weren't necessarily wrong. The losers just had the wrong strategies. And in a world where power is a zero-sum game, your strategy is everything. It doesn't matter what your principles are. It doesn't matter how right you are. Ultimately, principles are just decorations on the tombstones of dead men, because they went down saying, oh, but my principles, but they were eliminated. Your principles are only valuable to the extent to which they help you survive, and they help you spread them to other people. There's a lot of truth to be found in exploring the stories of history's losers. So I think that's another angle we may take in the future. So the thing I would say is anybody who's watched this, if you have any other questions, or you have if you want to challenge what we're saying in any sense, please feel free. But I would tell you that if some of this stuff may seem half-baked, it's not. There's a lot of that would be just a criticism of the way that I've explained all of this, the way that we've talked about this. There's so much more than just what we've covered here. So keep an open mind, and please feel free to reach out with any questions or anything you want me to touch on in the future, or any other stuff you want us to talk about.
I'm so glad that the timing of it doesn't work anymore. But yeah, when you were saying about the histories, losers and things like that, you heard it here first. Matthew Erickson, the Nazis were right, but had the wrong strategy. Please provide your email address.
Well, just real quick, based on that, this would be a really fun podcast episode. The Nazis won World War II.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I could explain why that was another thing that just occurred to me recently. The Nazis and the communists both won World War II.
That's fucking awesome. So maybe we'll let people kind of digest certainly this, and then also some of those resources that we're going to link. I'm definitely trying to piece things together a little bit at a time, and it's fun. We're in it together. Yeah, a message to appeal to libertarians in 2020. We're all in this together.
Yeah.
Shit.
Yeah.
All right, we'll do it again.
All right, sounds good, buddy.
Cool.